Thank you for coming. As every corporate CEO knows, dividends are paid only after obligations are met. And PR campaigns don't work when you've lost the trust of the people you serve. Unfortunately, these very basic tenets appear to be lost on BP. As the plumes of oil continue to flood the Gulf, as wildlife, undersea and on the shoreline, is suffocated by oil, as residents of the Gulf region are out of work and under siege for their way of life, BP is plowing on as though it is business as usual. Today, 40 of my colleagues in the House are joining me in writing to Mr. Tony Hayward and telling him what the American people are saying, but what he appears unable to hear. And that is this, that before BP diverts its financial resources to dividend payments and slick marketing campaigns, it must first fulfill its obligations. And its obligations are clear and straightforward. It must cap the well. It must clean up the Gulf. It must save wildlife and fisheries. And it must compensate those whose lives and livelihoods are being threatened and destroyed by this catastrophe. Then, and only then, should BP turn its attention to distributing profits to shareholders and repairing its image with marketing campaigns. In fact, in my view, BP would establish some goodwill if it did the reasonable and decent thing and put the Gulf Coast first and shareholders second and suspended its dividends. That's especially since this BP spill has already leaked more than 40 million gallons of crude oil in the Gulf. It's affected more than 120 miles of shoreline, and the vast majority of the oil remains, as we are seeing today, in deep sea plumes. BP has spent a little over $1 billion to the response thus far, but estimates are now coming in that the total cost of the cleanup may exceed $37 billion. And let's keep the money there for the job and the obligation before it's distributed on discretionary dividend payments. We're not saying that BP can't give out dividends and buy TV ads once the job is done. We're simply saying that this is no time, absolutely no time, to divert its resources from the immediate job at hand. And I'd like to next ask Representative Lois Capps, who's been a leader on shoreline protection, from the bitter experience her constituents experienced with the Santa Barbara spill years ago. Representative Capps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your leadership on gathering the signatures. It took just a matter of a few hours to get this many onto the letter that we can send to BP. And I'm pleased to join with my colleagues this morning to say that not a single cent should be spent on TV ads or stock dividends until BP stops the leaks, contains the spills, and the people of the Gulf are made whole. If BP is so concerned about its public image, it should plug the hole and clean up the disaster it created. And I'm also here to talk about this spill and what it means to me personally. I'm too well acquainted, unfortunately, with oil spills. 41 years ago, I could see and smell the oil spilled firsthand onto the channel that I love so dearly, the Santa Barbara Channel. That spill killed marine animals and blackened beaches. And sadly, I was appalled to see the same technologies, the boom, which collects about 50% of the spill. That technology was what was used 40 years ago. It's the same being used today. And this spill pales in comparison, the spill in 1969, to what we're seeing now in the waters and the wetlands in the Gulf. If this tragedy teaches us any lesson, it's that we should be using less energy and getting the energy that we need from cleaner sources. There is no doubt our addiction to oil jeopardizes our vibrant and economically important oceans and coasts. Now we're being reminded daily of the often forgotten value of these resources, and it is our responsibility to protect them. And we can see that changes are needed, now more than ever. The President has taken several steps to ensure a BP-like disaster never happens again. He's conducting a top-to-bottom review of the offshore drilling operations. He's halted proposed dangerous drilling in sensitive areas like Virginia and Alaska. And he's created an independent commission to investigate the cause, the response, and the impacts of BP spills, which is modeled on the legislation I introduced last month with Chairman Markey. Yesterday, I introduced another bill with Chairman Markey. This bill would give the President's Oil Spill Commission subpoena power to make sure BP isn't able to stonewall it. The people of the Gulf and the nation deserve an accurate and timely explanation. They need to know all of the circumstances and decisions that resulted in this disaster and of the impacts that will continue to be felt for decades to come. Congress needs to give the Commission this critically important tool. Only from a comprehensive independent review with subpoena power can the necessary lessons be learned, practices changed, and future disasters averted. So I thank my colleagues for being here. The President has said repeatedly, BP will be held accountable. The first thing they need to do right now is to stop their marketing, stop paying dividends. But we know we have more to do, and this group of Democratic lawmakers here is committed to that goal. So thank you, Peter, for holding this conference.
Thank you, Representative Capps. And next, Representative Paul Tonko of New York.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Representative Welch. Let me first and foremost thank Peter Welch for his outstanding leadership on advancing this letter to BP. To me, it's very straightforward and it's spot on. It's talking about priorities that need to be established. Priorities are critical here. There's going to be a sequential step along the way as we ratchet ourselves through this situation, but this is of a very high priority. Not diverting resources to marketing strategies and to investor payments, but rather going to the core ingredient principles that are essential right now to cap the well, to clean up the Gulf, and to make certain that the overall impact on the Gulf area, on agriculture, on the economy, on tourism, on a number of dynamics out there that are meaningful to working people, let's have those be the priorities. So I stand here in full support of what's being done here. It's a necessary, essential first step. Yes, there's an agenda that we need to pursue, but let's have these priorities established so that people impacted by this, the ecosystem that has been so impacted by this, is resolved and responded to by the appropriate setting of priorities. So forget the investor payments right now. Forget the marketing strategies. I would suggest to BP, and I hope they heed the advice in this letter, I would suggest rather than shore up your image, let's clean up our shores.
Thank you. That's great. Finally, Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee.
I'm proud to be here with these other members of Congress who are taking the leadership the American people demand on British Petroleum. British Petroleum has been known, BP, for bigger profits. That's what they've been about, learning how to drill deeper without any regard for capping any mistakes they made. When Mr. Hayward came before the Transportation Committee, he said they had a fail-safe system. That's why they didn't think about how they could possibly have this type of problem and have some type of system in place to stop this type of leak. Well, they didn't have a fail-safe system, and they're polluting the Gulf of Mexico. We're 2 days after World Ocean Day, and we're polluting one of our most precious bodies of water and possibly destroying the economic vitality and future of the Gulf Coast of the United States. BP is going to be known in the future as biggest polluter, and they certainly shouldn't be paying dividends to their investors or advertising, because no amount of advertising can cover up the stink and the smell that BP has caused in the Gulf, in this country, and to their name. They're going to have to change their name. And I hope they don't change it through bankruptcy, because that could easily happen. And I'm believing this country should put them into receivership, because the amount of damages are so great. And in testimony before the Judiciary Committee, they made it clear they would pay what they felt were direct costs. There are indirect costs that go beyond the $37 billion that we have up here. The indirect costs could be the state of Louisiana's future, the city of New Orleans' total existence, and the tourist trade in the Florida Panhandle and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. BP, biggest polluter, get your act together. Don't pay your dividends. Don't try to improve your name that you have sullied for all time. And receivership, it should be coming. Thank you, Mr. Welch.
Thank you. Any questions?
If BP does not heed your letter, are there steps that Congress can take to try to enforce the spirit of your letter, and do you have anything in mind?
corporations are free to make decisions about dividends, and the Congress does not have the power to change that. There is a full court press from Congress and from the administration, and I think on both sides of the aisle, to make certain that BP pays its full obligation. The one question is whether or not the unfunded liability here is getting so high that they have any room to pay dividends. But what legal authority we have is limited because corporations can't make that call. I think what we're suggesting is that the best PR campaign for BP would be to be transparent and responsible. And if they're responsible, they're going to put their profits in reserve to meet their obligation to the Gulf Coast.
I also would add that we've seen the public push back. The public doesn't like these ads. And when they hear now of these dividends, they're going to see right away how terrible this is that a company would be thinking so much of its shareholders and its bottom line, as so many people are suffering on the Gulf Coast as the wildlife has been so impacted. So public response to this can go a long way.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what about receivership? Is that something that could be done by legislation?
I don't think it can be done by legislation. I think the president, if he sees the obligations of this company to the people it's damaged being close to or greater than its assets, could put it into receivership to protect the people who are due and they're obligated to. I believe that they're going to eventually go bankrupt. I see BP pulling out, just like they pulled out of New Orleans after Andrew Jackson went to New Orleans in the Battle of Britain. They'll pull out of America too, and they'll find a way to cover themselves. Mr. Hayward wants his life back. He can't give the lives back to the 11 citizens that died on that rig, to the wildlife that's dying, to the industry that's dying. His life will be resurrected through bankruptcy, and the losers will be the people who obligations are due to, and that's why we should put them into receivership.
Yes, sir.
Do you plan to work with the White House at all on trying to get Mr. Hayward and the BP executives to heed your letter?
Well, we're on the same page here. President Obama has made the case. It's a straightforward one, and we're making the same case. So in that respect, we are working together. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.